I don't want to say it too loud because it'll start to fire, but when you say, Alexa, right? It's not play me, Peg by Steely Dan or Asia by Steely Dan. It's play me music to study to, play me music to sleep to. They're all functional use cases,
Mm.
right? And so one of the things that we learned, which you might find funny, is some of our artists have become very popular on incredibly well trafficked playlists, such as music for cats. So when we looked at some of the, gosh, wow, such and such artist has really blown up.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
playlists are there? And it's like, we're crushing it on music for cats, right? And this is a true story. You can't make this stuff up, right?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the MO Podcast, where we chat with changemakers building big, ambitious projects in the art and cultural sector. Today, our special guest is someone who's been at the intersection of music, technology, and entrepreneurship for over a decade. Jeff Yasuda was the founder of Blip.fm, a social music platform that gained a devoted following by allowing users to share and discover new music through personalized playlists. More recently, Jeff founded and has been building Feed.fm, a music as a service platform that powers the soundtracks of many businesses, from fitness apps to retail spaces. I've known Jeff loosely for many years, having met back when I was building earbits. Jeff popped into my feed recently when he announced that his band, Fuzz Collective, had just signed a record deal with modern soul label Color Red, which works with great artists like the New Master Sounds, the Great Boy All-Stars, and others. We are excited to dive into Jeff's journey as an entrepreneur, his challenges and successes in the music industry, and what it's like to blend his creative side with his business ventures. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, man. Good to see you. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for
having
joining us.
Me on. Yeah.
So, Jeff, mostly I think we'll talk a lot about what it's like building technology in the music space with Blip and Feed. But why don't you tell us a bit about your band and what the journey was like that led you to sign this record deal with Color Red?
Yeah, I've been playing guitar since I was 13. I've been playing in bands through high school, college, and when I joined the workforce in 1994, I dove headfirst into the wonderful world of finance and Wall Street, and kind of had to put the music stuff aside, right? In 2000, at the peak of the bubble, I moved into venture capital, and when you manage people's money, it's pretty hard to be a rocker. And so even then, I kind of pushed music aside. And it really wasn't until I got off the grid in sort of 2005 timeframe that kind of realized two critical and key important life lessons. Number one, life is too short to work with people you don't want to work with. And number two, life is too short not to pursue what you love doing. And for me, playing music, music I'm incredibly passionate about, but yes, I had to kind of put things on hold for the early part of my career, then dove into the wild world of music tech, and it wasn't until just quite honestly recently that I was able to make things work with the band. But yeah, so it's been quite honestly, what, I'm 52 now, so whatever the math is, it's been 40 years in the making. Good things come to those who are patient.
Yeah, well, man, I mean, I know at least three of the artists on the Color Red label. I think actually all three of them were on Earbits, so pretty familiar with them. How did it happen, Jeff? I mean, like, were you discovered? Did you have a relationship with them because of the music tech companies that you own? Like, how did Color Red come to know about you guys? And, sort of what was it like, ultimately getting an offer to sign with them?
Yeah, and it's funny, being part of what I'd like to think is an innovative music tech company, that's about DIY and sort of changing things. There's nothing that sounds more kind of traditional or old school than getting signed to a label. But I will say this, Joey, and Jonathan, as much as I would love to say, yes, we were discovered like a diamond in the rough, that could not be further from the truth. The honest truth, getting signed, and it's kind of interesting as I talk about this with a lot of artists, kind of the old way was, you'd be playing in clubs, hustling, whatever. And if you were so lucky that some A&R, person with golden ears were to say, oh my gosh, this band is so great, you'd kind of go into that world, right? Which is a lot of kind of luck per se. But this process for me was the furthest thing from that. Quite honestly, I kind of, to be honest, I sort of thought of my band as a startup, right? It's kind of like work backwards, right? So if the goal is to get a deal, right, to get signed, so to speak, you got to work backwards. Okay, well, you got to find a label, right? You got to negotiate a contract. You got to work with a producer. You got to, and finally, the very beginning of this, not a surprise to you two, we had to build a MVP. And that minimal viable product was our music, right? And so, a lot of it is, oh my gosh, even if you get discovered, so to speak, playing live, well, do you have any material recorded? And it just, every sort of thing that or creates a barrier or a hurdle is just an excuse for someone to say, let's just move on, right? And so, this a very calculated, thoughtful process, right? I'd been also cultivating a relationship, with Eddie Roberts, who's the producer, over years and years, right? I paid my dues, and supported him, over the course of time, worked with him in various capacities, and and then at one point had the guts to actually share my own creativity. And I will say, and Eddie will not have a problem confirming this, that the early stuff was pretty bad. And he let me know, right? So he's not a wallflower, right? He will tell you how he thinks. He also says something interesting to me, which is his belief is that every song, as bad as it may be, and believe me, my music at the outset qualified for that description, every song can be fixed and improved and turned into something positive. And that's just kind of his positive light about things. But he will also make it very clear if there are problems in the song. But yes, so to answer your question, it was a thoughtful process. It was very much, thinking about the process like starting a company. And at the end of it is really just about execution.
I want to stay with that for just 1 second. What, in your now newly and hard won perspective, made those early songs bad?
To use Eddie's words, when he asked for some feedback, he has this great British accent. I'm not going to try to attempt it, but he asked me if I wanted some feedback, and I said, yeah, I'd love it. And he said, well, they're boring, they're cliche, and I never need to hear it again. I was like, wow, how do you really feel about it? And
yeah.
That's hard to do something with, right? Because it's we've all been confronted with boring people, and you'd be like, okay, you need to stop being so boring. And it's like, all right, you got some pointers. Like, how do I become more entertaining?
No, fair point. So I think one, so as a songwriter, you oftentimes hear this, this adage: no one writes bridges anymore, for example, right, in a song. And bridges were very common, and back in the day, right? They were just kind of this sort of thematic compositional attribute, right, which kind of connected two pieces, hence the term bridge, sections of a song. And just in modern day music, it's all about don't bore us, get to the chorus kind of thing. It's like short songs, and some of the recent tracks are as short as a minute, right? Yeah. But our sound is very retro, right? You can hear, and Joe, you may have heard some of the tracks, but there's a lot of Hendrix, Steely Dan, obviously heavy funk attributes too, but like the New Master sounds have a very retro kind of sound too. And so I thought, bridge, writing a bridge is perfect, but by definition, bridges sound different, right? There are different sections. So the first thing he said was, get rid of the bridges, and I'm like, why? No one writes bridges anymore. He said, Jeff, because this is a groove piece, right? You're moving to the song and you throw in this bridge because you think you're being artistic. Ooh, right? And all of a sudden it breaks up the groove, right? You're kind of like, yeah, this is working. And then you have this weird section. Get rid of it. But I was like, no, but get rid of it, right? And that's why you work with a producer, right? Who's got that sort of, the insight, who's not there day to day, almost like a board member, right? To some extent, which is like, why are you building a bridge in the desert, dude? Well, the rains will come. I beg to differ, right? And but a lot of this is just guidance. And for me, it was a brand new, it was a brave new world. I'd never really done this, right? I mean, the irony is that, I've been licensing music, working with artists, we are a label and a publisher ourselves for 10 years, right? But I was never the content creator, right? It was kind of worked with them and pushed their content. So it was really, wild to be on the other side. And there's a lot of learning, to be honest, that I had to go through.
Are they, in providing this sort of feedback about the bridges, is the expectation with your album that every song should be something that, that would be suitable for radio? Or, do you have tracks that would not be radio play, and those are going to be the B-sides that the super fans get really into, but, maybe they're too long or whatever? Or in working with this label, is the goal to try to make everything a potential hit? Or how do you sort of think about that?
Well, there's a lot of depth in that question to unpack. So I'll try to start from, from the top, which is, I think, with music, and even as I've worked with artists, if you try to write a song in a certain way for a certain end goal, even though I just kind of went through that, think of it as a startup, what's missing, particularly in art, is the authenticity, right? It's not, I wrote this post, Joey, that's how we reconnected, but, and there's this great, Oscar Wilde quote, right? Which is, be yourself because everyone else is taken. Right. And I write about, I was writing about, listening to the, when Jimi Hendrix would play, there are these bends he would do where, it's coming in and out of tune. Is he going to nail the vibrato, or is this thing going to go off, off the track? And it's that tension that makes it, powerful, and you think, oh my God, I could do that. And you race to your guitar and you try it yourself, only to realize you will never be Jimi Hendrix, right? The flip side is Jimi Hendrix will also never be you, right? And granted, probably would not ever choose to be my playing had he been alive. But the reality is that, each and every person has an authentic individuality to their playing, right? And so if you, Joey, to your question, try to create a track, because you want it to be a hit, you're not, in my view, you're not being authentic, right? And that wasn't the goal, right? My goal was really to have this, debut album, first of all, just to get it out, right? Just to get the darn thing out the door, right? And have the guts to share it with the world, number one. But most importantly, something that, I was proud of and the guys in the band were proud of, right? And I think on that note around authenticity, Joey, it was a very in-depth question, right? Is even the way we recorded it was to really emphasize the authenticity and kind of that unique moment. We recorded all the instrumentals in one take, right? So no overdubs. The vocals, I was told my vocals weren't strong enough to do it in one take, so we did overdub the vocals, but all the solos, everything, that was it. This is kind of like, how Miles Davis used to do, right? All the bands of yesteryear, right? Miles would go in when he did Someday My Prince Will Come. You listen to take one and compare that to take two. It's a completely different song almost, right? The intonation, was he a little ahead or behind the, beat? The melody was slightly different. The solos were totally different. I mean, that's what our recordings were like. So the worst is when you're feeling it, the band is hitting that moment, right? Which just can't be replicated. I mean, it can get close, but the energy, all of that can never be replicated, right? And so, and then your solo comes and all of a sudden you flub the solo, right? And it's like, oh my God, right? And you got to start again, and the band wants to kill you, right? That's the kind of stuff, right? And that, even that tension, right? Where, your solo comes, you play it, and you're kind of like, oh my God, am I going to go off the rails, or can it work, right? But again, a good producer, will say, no. I know you hit a clam there, but it makes it real, right? And so this is a very thoughtful process that we had. And so, we came to the rehearsal, we came to the, the studio completely rehearsed, right? Like it were a gig.
Yeah. I definitely want to get to talking about your tech, your entrepreneurship in the arts, but I have two questions more while we're talking about your project and the label. So I feel like you're in a really unique position to answer this question, but as an entrepreneur, sometimes you go out, you try to raise capital or something for a company. And let's say you were also at the same time running another company. Maybe it doesn't take up that much of your time or whatever, but, investors may look at it and be like, look, we can't have somebody who is splitting their time between two things, right? And I don't know how much of your time the various projects take up, but does a label look at this the same way as an investor? And like, do they feel like there's a conflict with you running a company? I mean, what if your album starts to gain tremendous traction and they want you to go on tour with the band? What's that decision making like for them? They love your music, obviously, but that it's not your only obligation.
I will first start by saying you are kindly optimistic with your view of where this can go. It's interesting, right? And I'll actually throw in more complexity, right? I'm a husband, I'm a dad, right? And you gotta, there's a lot of balls, that are being juggled right now. And and I think the answer is this, which is we are human beings, right? We are, as a CEO of a company, I am a human being. And part of being a human being is that you've got a lot of things that interest you, right? And there are a lot of things that compete for your time, right? And so for me, a lot of it is, making that choice to make time for certain things. And so, you could just as well argue, would the label be upset if this thing, blows up and I have to, go on tour, so to speak, as my existing investor pool saying, dude, come on, there's challenges to fix, and you're out, farting around playing in your band. Well, you can also say the same thing. It's like, dude, there's problems to fix. You can't spend any time with your family, right? And actually, back in the day, and I think we're all kind of relatively the same vintage, that kind of nonsense was tolerated, right? When we started our career, right? It's like, no, you're not spending time with your family. You can't go home. You got stuff to do, particularly when I was on Wall Street, right? And so I think, the best way to answer that is, just like kind of when we hire people, we hire a full person, right? I'm not expecting them to work all day long, right? And I would say this, which is, and this happened to me as I went through the process, writing songs. I'm a huge believer. Everything in the human body needs exercise to get better. If it's muscles, right? If it's eyesight, if it's whatever it might be, the brain, left brain, right brain. When I started exercising my right brain, that creative element, writing tracks, which, by the way, the more you exercise it, it shouldn't be a surprise, you get better at it, right? It actually, a lot of that creativity and that brain exercise actually translated into my work life as well, right? A lot of that creativity, a lot of the ideas, right, it permeated into my, my professional life. And so, I will say this, right, which, label is a business, getting back to sort of your specific question on Color Red, I think where and what Color Red has done an incredible job, with kind of their retro sound, all the bands on the Dumpsta Funk is another one. George Porter Jr., from sort of the New Orleans funk meters, scene. All of the bands, Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings, like they're all very kind of retro sounding. And there's kind of a movement right now of that retro sound in a lot of film, movies, things of that nature. That was one of the reasons why Color Red seemed to be interested in. Oh, I can see your songs being a good fit for this type of use case. So the expectation wasn't necessarily for us ever to go on tour, so to speak. It was really, hey, what's a use case for your music, right? Could it be a sync opportunity? Could it be placed in commercials, indie films, that kind of stuff. And so that was kind of the draw, I think, for us and that particular label.
Got it.
Jeff, I feel like in comparison to like the Stones and other people that are out on tour, you guys are spring chickens. So it's
yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
there's an aging of the entertainment out there already in place. So yes. It's not so bad.
Yes, thank you. I've never been accused of being a spring chicken in recent years, but I'll take it. So.
Jeff, I got one more question about the label opportunity before we transition into your tech endeavors. I think what a record label used to do was most of them were very similar, right? They would give you an advance, or they would pay for your ability to go into the studio and record. They would be the distributor, they would handle marketing. There was so much that the label was in charge of. Pretty much your main role was to just go in, record, and then hit the road or whatever. But the role of a label has changed a lot over the past decade and a half, 2 decades, especially with like everything from social media to self-publishing platforms, and really musicians have the ability now. Recording is not as expensive as it used to be. Most bands can probably afford to go in and record a reasonable demo or even an album without support from a label. What is it that tell me a little bit about what you think the various roles of record labels are today for your band, out of those various activities that labels are doing now in this new sort of environment.
I was talking to a booking agent who recently, that was saying the majority of his clients don't have label deals, right? And so you asked me, why? What was the point of doing this? In a word, it's credibility, right? There's a tremendous credibility that comes with being, signed, right? And label deals, I even use the old term record deals, right? Come in a lot of different flavors, right? They're not, one size fit all, they're attributes of the deal. You started mentioning advances and things of that nature. They're structured in a lot of different ways, depending upon the needs of the artist and the label, right? But I think from our perspective, it was wonderful from our view to be, even associated with some of these folks. The flip side too, though, is, the ownership of the masters and a lot of the deal, attributes are things that I know quite a lot about, right? And so, the old adage, to your point, is, well, if you don't pay for studio time, the label owns your. And so, when we actually went into this process, I paid for studio time, right? I paid for the time because I wanted to own the masters, right? And so, I don't think I'm saying anything out of school, but that's, sort of the general, particularly, I don't think the Color Red folks would be, upset about that. But I think part of it too is, when you go into this transaction, right, there's certain dials and knobs that you pull, right? And I think the amazing thing is all the different attributes that Color Red has behind the scenes, right? So when you think about streaming, for example, and you guys know this, is the world now is controlled by playlisters, right? So how do you get, to playlist? How do you get them to pick up your track and put it on the playlist? Well, a 52-year-old dad who's a newbie, probably has credibility of next to zero, right? Whereas if the label calls, a certain playlister that has consistently put out, great tracks, again, it's that credibility element, right?
Awesome. I think we'll put out this episode just after the album is released. So everybody who's listening, go check out Fuzz Collective. I'm sure it's available on your favorite streaming service by the time this episode comes out. If not, we'll have some links for everybody. But all right, amazing, Jeff. Congrats on the signing of the deal, and very much looking forward to hearing the album.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Want to go back and talk about your foray into the music space. Was Blip.fm the first thing you ever built in the music industry? And for those of our users who don't know about it, what was Blip.fm?
No is the answer. I've had a large swath of failures as a startup entrepreneur. The one that I had before that was was kind of a CRM for garage bands. It was called Fuzz Artists. And actually we owned fuzz.com, which is now the URL for my band. So you kind of see how things, sort of things change and how things come back. But it was a platform that, where this is way back in sort of near the turn of the century, where bands could come upload their content, upload their tour schedule, and really, I think the basic gist is we were trying to do too much with this platform, right? And it was sort of the modern label, and the whole idea behind this. We had probably 30,000 bands that had uploaded content to this. The idea was, okay, if we see sort of trends, who could we actually sign as a label and a management company?
And this was Fuzz?
This was called Fuzz Artists. Yeah, it was fuzz.com in the early days.
Would you have been at that time competing with MySpace?
So we were, God, yeah. I mean, it's like you're firing neurons that haven't been activated. So if you remember MySpace back in that day, was kind of jerry-rigged to some extent, right? It was like a hacked version of, with spaghetti code, that bands use to try to expose their work, right? And it wasn't optimized, right? It's sort of like, okay, well, we're going to figure out how to hack the system, and we're gonna put our band content up here. And so the difference on that was that we were 100% focused on trying to be all things that a band would need, right? And so, and none of this stuff was available back, sort of 2005 timeframe. And the basic gist on this, and, I've learned, and actually this is the segue into Blip, right? It was kind of the big top circus of indie music, right? It's like, in this ring, you can do this. In this ring, you can do, in this, and it was just too much, right? There wasn't kind of a core capability or core user experience that we could optimize. And that, and again, I have to make the mistake my own way. And that's what led into Blip FM, which, you just mentioned, which was the Twitter for music. And quite honestly, I had nothing to do with it, right? It was my engineers, right, that at one point said, you know what, this Fuzz thing isn't working. Let's go. They told me about it, but they were, sort of messing around with this new concept, right? On Twitter, you tweet, or X, but back then on Twitter, you tweet about what you're doing. On Blip FM, you blip about the bands that you like, right? And this blip actually would go out, and you'd be able to push out a particular song to all the people that followed you, right? And so and it was a very singular experience, right? And what was interesting about this is, before there was a term called growth hacking, right? We grew to 1 million monthly uniques in maybe like 4 months, 5 months. It was cuckoo, right? And we were the fastest. We were growing faster than Twitter did in its early days. In fact, we were one of as you may recall, this was a time when there were a lot of companies that used the Twitter ecosystem, right? You would be able to publish onto Twitter So we were the largest music platform on Twitter, right? And so, the executive team all knew about, this tiny little startup, and there were like 5 of us, right? And so, what happened with this, quite honestly, we got big enough to be noticed, which is the good news. The bad news is we got big enough, and the rights holders, the labels and publishers, weren't exactly thrilled with what we were doing, right? And we worked everything out with them, but the learning for me was, oh my God, running a startup is so difficult. You sprinkle a little music licensing pixie dust on this, and it becomes, even more difficult, right? But that complexity around music licensing and how to do it and make it turnkey, again, I'm a big believer entrepreneurs learn from their mistakes, is what really, was sort of the foundational genesis of moving into Feed FM, right? So in a sentence, right, our whole mission has been to make licensing music incredibly easy and turnkey, right? Because my clients, and the good news, I guess, is we've established I'll say this: the good news is we're the market leader powering music and fitness. The bad news is we're the market leader powering music for fitness, right? Fitness has had a tough time, but fitness companies care about, particularly digital fitness companies care about one thing and one thing only, and that is boosting LTV, right? Boosting lifetime value. And so everything that we do around creating a compelling content experience through great music has to be, oh, okay, there's better music, people will pay more, they'll stay on longer, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but I think, sorry, Joey, this is kind of the genesis, right, of, your question around Blip FM, right? It was sort of like Fuzz didn't work. It didn't work because it was the big top circus, too many competing different product offerings, right? Blip was singular. It worked. It did, I hate the term, it went viral, right? But the whole core of the business was sharing music, which lent for, hey, getting more people on the platform. But we ran into complexities around licensing. And so the current business, Feed FM, was 100% built to make it incredibly easy for entities who wanted to use music to be able to quickly license it, and make sure, on the flip side, that the rights holders and the artists that we know and love get fairly compensated.
Jeff, what did you sort of learn from doing Blip that really guided your decision-making process about what to build next and how to build it? I certainly learned a bunch of things building Earbits. And in fact, the funny part is the only idea I ever got excited about after that, or while I was building Earbits, I thought there ought to be a platform where content owners can put music up, set their own licensing rates that they want, and then startups can come license catalog based on rates they're willing to pay, and have, because for us, we had to build our own catalog. We had to sign thousands and thousands of licensing agreements with both directly with bands and then also with record labels. I thought, there's so many music startups that want to get off the ground. They don't want to pay the compulsory rates. They're offering something that's different and unique. And maybe there should be some consideration for the fact that it's not just a radio program, or it's not this thing. There needs to be more nuance to it. And there's so many content owners who would be willing to license their music at cheaper than the compulsory rates, or if you're willing to provide certain tools, they may be willing to give you some leeway on the royalties or whatever else. And there just didn't seem to be any platforms where you could go and just say, look, I'm willing to pay this much, and I'll take any music that's under that threshold, and I want to build a music experience, just using whatever catalog I can afford, given my business model or whatever. That was one of the only ideas I ever had. It sounds to some extent like that basically is Feed to some extent.
It is, you're adding a level of complexity beyond that, right? Which is a flexible pricing model, which is incredibly complex. But yes, I mean, that is the future, right? Where, it becomes really a question about, invariably it's, well, how much do you have to spend, right? So you're smart enough to know you can't just use music, right? But, the next question is, well, what's your budget? Right. And based on that budget, right, you ask, okay, well, what are the use cases? Is this US only? Is this international? Is this, do we need major label content? Are we okay with, production music, which isn't necessarily bad music, but it's not the hits, right? Is indie okay? Well, maybe it's okay if it's you're right. I mean, the rabbit hole goes incredibly, gets deeper and deeper as you start asking more questions. But I think, as it relates to our own business, we quickly came to the understanding that our customers could not care, interactive, non-interactive, section 114, is it a sync? Is it, does this require, PRO licenses? What's a PRO? What's sound exchange? All this, what's the performance complement? All of this stuff, right? That, any, music licensing person will know, but in the parlance of, somebody who wants to build a cool app that has jumping jacks or whatever in it, it's like, this is crazy talk, right? And then to mention, to even get some of this, to understand and even be conversant in it, you're paying, lawyers, now $1,500 an hour just to get educated, right? So you don't get sued, right? And so, the not only the complexity, but the actual costs goes through the roof, right? And so a lot of what Feed, was aiming to do and still aims to do is there's actually three components, right? Number one is we handle all of the brain damage associated with licensing, right? So all that complexity goes out the door, right? Now, number two, it's, our customers are highly technologically, sophisticated, right? Handling millions and millions of users, right? And so, our tech has to work. It has to be very easy to integrate, right? And then number three is the data piece, right? So the data piece actually has, two attributes. Number one is, the rights holders, certainly lean on us to provide, accurate reporting to them so I can pay them according to usage, right? That's number one. But every day, we also have to prove to our customers that if you just add music, how does this boost LTV, right? Specifically, how does it increase average session time? How does it increase sessions per period? How does it improve day 30, day 60, day 90 retention, right? But, I think the foundational attributes of what we were trying to do is to make music accessible, and at the same time make sure that the rights holders and the artists that we know and love, get fairly compensated.
Just for the novice listener here, myself included, so who are the sort of main clients of Feed, and sort of where, for someone who's not going to be doing this from a business to business standpoint, but where do they unsuspectingly come into contact with your product?
Yeah, so on the fitness front, we're working with great brands like Tonal. Lululemon has a product which was formerly known as the Mirror. We're on Life Fitness, products. We're on Nordic Track, all the iFit products, treadmills, bikes. But we also do stuff outside of fitness, right? We, funny enough, we power music recently, and I kind of laugh. There's a silent disco in SFO, the airport, right? So we power music there, right, on headphones. We power music, in prisons, right? We power music in the back of cars, and the list goes on. We've got social media applications. We power music in games. So it's really all across the board. Fitness is really where we've made probably the most headway. But we're looking to expand into other areas. And I think where the foundational or fundamental element, which I think is really kind of fun about music, as you guys know, or just audio in general, that audio is the only medium that you can enjoy while you are doing something else, right? So the best example is when you're driving a car, right? Should you really be looking at a video when you're driving a car?
I plead the fifth on that.
Right. Well, yeah, no comment here.
That just shows our age, Jeff. That just shows our age. If you're younger than 30, of course it's something you should be doing when you're driving.
Right. But you shouldn't be looking at a picture. But you can listen to music, right? But also, like when you're playing a game, right, you can be listening to music, right? When you're shopping, you can be listening to music. While you're while you're working out, you can listen to music, right? And so but yes, a lot of it is I think it's a brave new world, right, for sort of audio opportunities, right? And so across a variety of different use cases that we probably haven't even thought about yet.
Jeff, I think this is
sorry, go ahead, Joe. What is as you're working on right now, what is like the next adjacent space that is where you're putting sort of most of your time and energy in terms of trying to capture that outside of fitness?
So when you talk about kind of the next area for us, there's a couple things that we're doing, but I'm also a believer, and I'm going to put my VC hat on for a second here, which is, I've always found that trying to focus in an area where you're already winning, particularly in a world where you don't have endless resources, right? And you don't have endless time, and you can't hire, millions and millions of people, right? Massive teams. You focus where you're going to win, right? So in fitness, for example, I don't know if you've got a Peloton or a Tonal or any of these,
I have a Peloton, which now is just a dumb stationary bike because I don't pay subscription.
Oh no, okay. Well,
but I do listen to podcasts while I'm on it. So
okay. Well, there you go. Well, so some of this is in fitness, there's a palpable movement right now towards personalization, right? So how can I create the ideal workout for Joey Flores or Jonathan Neal that's specific to your needs, right? Well, okay, your needs may also be at a certain time of day, right? And so what sort of workout, do you work better in group classes? Do you like individual? You don't like the pressure, or you thrive on that? There's a lot of sort of specific attributes that would ideally at the end of the day create a better experience for you, right? Personalized, just like music, right? Personalized music is a way better experience, right? And this is why, a lot of those collaborative filtering algorithms in the early days from Pandora, right, worked so well, right? But I think, in fitness, the complexity is real because of the data challenges, right? There's tremendous amount of data, different, and this is where, and I hate to use the term because you're sick of it and you're going to throw up in your mouth a little bit, but this is where machine learning algorithms come into play because they love big data, they love lots of data, right? And very simply, right, it's around how do I create a predictive algorithm, right? Taking a bunch of data points all over and effectively draw a regression through that, right? What are similar, and so I think a lot of that, with if our customers want to have the right workout to the right person at the right time, it shouldn't be a surprise that I should be thinking, Feed FM should be thinking about how do we provide the right music to the right person at the right time, right? It's easy to say, it is incredibly difficult to do, right? And so go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I tend to listen to a lot of metal when I work out, just because, it's got this high charged energy to it. But I listen to metal with a much faster BPM when I'm riding an exercise bike. And when I'm weightlifting, I want something that's slower and, a little bit aggressive in a different way. So I could see that there would be this thing. It's not like every time I go to work out, I want the same exact playlist. It quite depends on what workout am I doing. So I could see that this is not an easy problem to solve, even for one individual person.
I could even see where you kind of reverse it, where it's like you also switch from what it is that someone wants to be listening to when they work out to the playlist and the type of music being the thing that indicates to the person what level of of activity they should be doing. So I can think about this from like, you think about like marathon training programs that last like months and months, and that ladder up over time. And if you had basically just like a audio program that could be the type of music that you like with the beats per minute that are important for the various different workouts, that you didn't even have to like, you don't even have to look at your spreadsheet. You basically just like, open up your app or, whatever, whoever's using it. And it's tricky because you've got to match the length of the songs in some sense to what the workout is and how fast they are, and those change depending on who it is and what genres of music they want to be listening to and all these types of things. But it's like hugely complex, but can be very compelling, because if someone, all they have to do is just stick their earbuds in and start going for a run, and the voice goes like, all right, like here's what we're doing today, 20 minutes at this tempo, 5 minutes at this tempo, and then the music just starts, and based on how the music is going is telling your body what it should be doing. That's very powerful for taking the cognitive element out of it, which is often what's very difficult for people to do, especially when they're exercising, right? Like
totally. Well, so Jonathan, you're touching on kind of the next wave, which is fascinating. And I'll describe this next wave through science fiction. I love science fiction because if it can be imagined, it can be done, right? We're seeing all this stuff now. And so, let's take a walk down memory lane, right? And go back to Minority Report. Do you remember that movie?
Totally. Yeah.
Tom Cruise. And so remember there's that scene where he's standing in front of a J. Crew in the future, right? And this, there's something that flashes his eyes, right? Does a retinal scan, and while he's window shopping,
right?
And the, what's available in the window changes based on him, right? So it's hyper personalized down to the individual person. Well, on exactly what you were saying, Jonathan, and this is next level stuff because no one's doing this, right? But the question becomes, how does content affect human performance?
Sure.
Okay? How does content affect human performance? Now, this stuff is kind of creepy and kind of awesome, right? Because it can be manipulative, right? In the J. Crew example. But what about and this is not surprising, for the same reason they have walk-up songs, right? And everyone's probably following, what's happening in baseball right now, but the reason they have walk-up songs, right, is that it fires up the batter, right? And when he or she, he's going into battle, right? And so when you start thinking about this, okay, personalized fitness, personalized. So let's say, for example, that I know when, Jonathan, this is the third consecutive Monday at 9:30 that he's got on his rower, right? And we know that every time we play tracks from Zeppelin 4, that his power output on the pool is on average 3% higher than when we play something else, right? That becomes incredibly powerful to kind of trick the mind, right? And there's countless, when you start talking about the neuroscience around content and how certain neurons fire based on certain inputs, right? We know for a fact that the brain responds differently to different content, right? What becomes fascinating is if that brain connection actually will yield output wins in something like polling, right?
Right.
And so, so these are kind of things, and we're starting to, we've been working with a Stanford professor, Daniel Bowling, on a lot of these concepts, right? And one of the things that he's been spending a lot of time on is a concept called synchrony, which is pretty fascinating. So we were just riffing on, imagine you're talking about kind of a running app, I think, a second ago. Imagine if I could offer a running app that guarantees that you will improve your miles split time, by 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it is, right? I mean, if you're a runner, why wouldn't you ever buy that? Why wouldn't you use that app, right? Everyone would use that, right? And particularly if there's no risk, right? If you don't, achieve it, and there's ways to track, oh, well, GPS actually showed you did, there's ways to track this. But what was interesting is that Daniel has been doing these experiments. Well, he'll get participants to actually track a certain distance, in kind of a somewhat, when setting, right?
Yeah.
Like, where, okay, I want you to listen to this track, right? When you start at point A and end at point B, right? You can track it via GPS. Okay, how long did it take, right? Then he started saying, okay, well, listen to different tracks, right? And see, the same distance. Then he started doing things which are fascinating, which was, here's the same tracks. So in your mind, you'll say, okay, oh yeah, I listened to whatever, Black Dog on Zeppelin 4. But what he won't tell you is he'll increase the speed, the BPM, and alter the track just slightly, not a derivative work, but just alter the speed of the track and increase it maybe by 3 to 5 beats per minute, right? So the mind, like you probably couldn't really tell, right? It's close enough. But what was fascinating, you could probably guess, they got to the destination.
Increase their tempo, right? Yeah.
And so there's a lot of like cool things, and that's called synchrony.
Yeah.
A lot of cool things that, smart neuroscience scientists are starting to do to say, can we alter human performance by altering content?
It seems like a no-brainer in a certain sense, because this is a long time ago now, but was training for triathlons, and you'd be listening to tracks on the bike, and this came in the sort of early days of having earbuds and things like that. And there are moments where a particularly good song, nothing was coordinated at that point, but a particularly good song would show up at the moment that you had to take a big hill or something like that, even in just a training run, and it was like boom, gone. You know what I mean? It's like, it felt like very little effort versus when you had nothing going on, nothing to kind of distract you from, whatever pain or discomfort you're feeling during a particular training run. And, for ages, we've known that music is the, short circuit to the soul, to a certain extent, right? Like is the thing that triggers the emotions, which is why our teenagers are, uniquely predisposed to consuming a lot of it. Yeah. But I can also, do you imagine a moment in the future? Now this goes into the sort of politics and sports itself, but it's like, performance enhancing music will have to be regulated in competition as much as as much as other enhancements, right? Nope.
I mean,
no Zeppelin. Sorry, can't do it. It's just too effective.
can't have that. No Fuzz Collective. It just works too well.
Yeah, exactly.
You heard it here first, right?
Right.
No. Well, the one trick is, obviously it's pretty hard to test for it.
Sure.
Right. But I think
person's different, right? Personalization, right? Like the thing that fire up one person might not be the thing that fire up somebody else.
That's right. But I think, look, and it's funny too, and don't get me started on this, but, it's like people, think about, the great new frontier, it's getting to Mars and all this. No, man, the great new frontier is right in here. Our brain, there is so much in our brain that we don't understand, right? And so, as you start, trying to, as you go through the process now, there's a lot of, very, very smart folks that are going through, and studying the effects of content, on human performance, right? It's a brave new world. There's another doctor at the University of London, University of Brunel in London, Dr. Kara Georges, who, has been studying this for decades now, right? About how particular songs will affect for a particular user. And he does this on soccer players, right? And has experimented on entire teams about, certain music and affecting performance. So it's not a new thing, but where it's interesting is how we can potentially apply this at scale, right? That's where Feed FM comes in. I mean, we handle about 50 million API calls a day, right? Our music, it touches millions of people, and so, as you start thinking about, okay, well, what sort of, tests can we run, right? Across, and it's tough too, right? You got to be thoughtful about what test you want to try to, proving any sort of causal connection is very, very difficult, right? But that means you have to remove all the different externalities, right? Did somebody row harder because of the music, or was it because the instructor at minute 55 said, dude, pull harder, right? Right. So there's a lot of different factors involved. Was the bench press more effective, when the Zeppelin 4 track came up, or is that just because Joey, who's so jacked, loves benching, but when he does, bicep curls, he falls apart, right? I don't know. It's that personalization element that comes into it. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now. We're just beginning to touch the surface. Sorry, this is a very lengthy, long-winded answer to your question around what's next, dude.
No, it's super interesting. I mean, going deep on that vertical demonstrates that there's quite a bit of depth even in just the fitness category, which is, obviously itself might be one category, but is expansive in terms of touching on all these various different types of activities.
I will say this, though, because you did ask a question. I know you wanted a fun answer around, well, what verticals outside of fitness? Here's one that sort of, and I'm not saying we're going after this, but it was very eye-opening to me. So we've, the irony here is that, we launched Feed FM, to make it, to simplify the whole licensing process, with labels and publishers. Well, it turns out now we are actually a label and a publisher, right? So we work with, probably around 30 to 40, amazing songwriters and artists, many who are touring professionally, who are writing and producing music for us. A lot of times they are for specific use cases around, things like studying, focus music, meditation, right? Kind of that digital health attribute, and it's funny because the number one asked, I don't want to say it too loud because it'll start to fire, but when you say, Alexa, right? It's not play me, Peg by Steely Dan or Asia by Steely Dan. It's play me music to study to, play me music to sleep to, play me music to, focus, playing music to cook to. They're all functional use cases, right? And so one of the things that we learned, which you might find funny, is some of our artists have become very popular on incredibly well trafficked playlists, such as music for cats, and relaxing music for dogs, right? So when owners go out whatever for the day, cats and dogs need mental wellness as well.
Yeah.
Right? And so I kind of looked at some.
I'm huge in the cat space. Huge. Yeah. Like, I mean, 50 billion downloads for Siamese. It's amazing.
Right. So when we looked at some of the, wow, such and such artist has really blown up. Yeah. You kind of look at, oh my God, like what playlists are there? And it's like, we're crushing it on music for cats, right? And this is a true story. You can't make this stuff up, right? And it's sort of like, oh my God. I mean, that's both amazing, and I don't know, do we tell this artist or not? And so
right.
Anyway, but
obviously the next adjacent thing is to go into a therapy business in order to take care of the fragile egos of those artists who find that they're big in the cat.
and this is how great business is.
We have our own wellness category for our artists to discover discover that their music has really made it big, but not what they expected.
That's right. Well, maybe you're gonna have to edit this piece of edit this piece of the interview so that idea doesn't
get out in the open.
Yeah, that's right. The Winklevi steal or something. So anyway.
Well, sometimes like to summarize like learning lessons from our interviews. And I think, whether you're a machine learning engineer or a Stanford PhD or trying to figure out what music to play for cats, I think the lesson learned here is that if you play Black Dog or When the Levee Breaks from Led Zeppelin 4, it's just going to improve everybody's lives, right?
I will not argue with that. So
yeah. It seems like Feed is in a very good position to be able to, like, the best, the best songs of all time on criteria that you would never think about.
Yeah
right.
Totally.
You just have like a whole channel for veterinarians, like music for veterinarian offices, playing off of this like cat music, dog music thing. Like, hey, we built playlists that are very soothing to animals. That could be interesting.
Yeah, totally. Well, what about humans, right? They're going to doctors' offices,
hospitals,
high anxiety, and oftentimes you walk into these and it's like there's either no music playing, right? Sometimes you're wondering, what is this that's on, right? And again, the brain works in so many different ways, right? The subconscious, right? If you walk into the surgery waiting room for a surgery center, right? The anxiety is palpable in that room, right? Well, why don't they have relaxing music for cats, right? Or music, right, for people that are pre-op, right? I mean, it's to me it makes, as opposed to some like headbanging metal stuff that Joey likes, right? Maybe Joey would find that relaxing, but
maybe not pre-surgery.
Okay.
That's what the surgeons are listening to. They have all sorts of crazy stuff that they're listening to once the patients are out.
Absolutely.
It's all very calm and quiet and careful before the anesthesiologist press that button, and then as soon as you're out, it's like, all right, let's do this thing.
Let's do this. Right. That's their workout, right? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, just as I'm laying down and the anesthesia is kicking in, I hear the surgeon put on headphones and he's playing "Kill 'Em All" by Metallica. I'm like, no.
Right.
All right, Jeff. So we usually wrap up the episode with what we call our more opinion segment. And so we've got 3 questions that we like to ask our guests here that are, off the beaten path. So I'm going to dive right in. If someone gave you $10 million to build something else, something new, couldn't be your current company and it couldn't be for your band, what would you like to do or build, whether it's a project or an enterprise, if you had $10 million of budget?
Oh, I would attack climate change without even thinking.
Any ideas there?
I don't necessarily off the top of my head. The tricky element is, I know you wanted a quick answer and I'm already violating that, but there are a lot of folks that are doing what I'll call the buffet approach to climate change, where they turn into a fund, right? And I'm gonna pick this winner and in a certain space. I really enjoy kind of getting deep and getting into the weeds. And I'm just wondering if there's, an opportunity to get much more in depth with it. Right. And I don't know, start an operating company around that. Maybe, I don't know if it's a tech company. I don't, it still needs some work, but my next thing is I definitely want to go, and if I'm audacious enough to try to do something that's good for the world, that, helps our kids, because the way we've treated this, plan of ours is pretty irresponsible. And I'm hoping we could do something to make it better for the next generation.
Or When the Levee Breaks. Sorry, couldn't help myself. All right.
That was a good one. Is that on Zeppelin 4, by the way?
It is.
It is. Okay. I was like, I might have to fact check you on that, but
not necessary, because I looked it up while we were sitting here.
Yeah, you looked it up. Okay. Black Dog is definitely on Zeppelin 4.
Yeah, so. just to make sure. Okay, all right. Next, more opinions question. This is the one we usually warn people about, so hopefully you saw this in our email to you. But what is someone else or something else that's building or being built in the art and cultural sector that you're excited about and would love to bring some attention to?
Ooh, okay. I gotta mention it. It's a very polarizing topic, but it is pretty fascinating, which is some of the generative music stuff that's going on. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it is fascinating to see and maybe I shouldn't mention specific company names, but it is incredible to see. And I was a naysayer, and I will go on record to say I was a naysayer, in the early days when people would ask the question, can generative AI ever replace a human being? And I very quickly said never. And the question would be like, well, why? And you'd say, well, like, listen to it. It's terrible, right? You can tell that it lacks context. It is nuts to see and to hear how quickly these algorithms are basically being able to extrapolate, aggregate at mass scale music that actually is sounding very compelling, right?
Yeah.
And I know internally at a lot of these big DSPs, they all have, generative AI groups that are focused on this challenge at massive scale. I mean, we're doing 55 million API calls a day. These guys are doing billions, right? And so, and again, AI algorithms love tons of data, right? And I'm not making comments around copywriting and whether or not it's okay. And some are, some of these engines are, compensating rights holders, in ways that are palatable to both parties. But it's pretty amazing what's happened.
Yeah, no question. I'm not afraid to shout out a company. So I've tried Udio, which I'm sure is one of the ones that you're familiar with. I agree with you. Like the quality of the tracks is incredible. Like I can't. As soon as I heard it, I was like, wow, this is really pretty amazing. And again, you just start to realize that, like, everybody thought unskilled workers were going to be the first ones to place and displace, and now it seems more and more like the creative sector is in some serious trouble. I will say, that its adherence to the prompt is still not good. Like, mm-hmm. I have yet to tell it what I want and get anything even close to what I asked for, but the quality of the song is really good. Like, had I asked for something that it produced, like I got no complaints about how much it sounds like a real song, and to me would be indistinguishable from something that was created by musicians in a studio. But it's never really nailed what I was asking for. I mean, sometimes it's just like really, really far off. Like I like some bands that combine jazz with metal, and I've asked for that. It does not know how to do that whatsoever. Yeah. I mean, like it's really. I mean, it doesn't sound anything like jazz or metal. I mean, it will just come out completely wrong. But I mean, it's on its like first iteration, so it's going to get much, much crazier.
Well, and actually, see, you mentioned something that's kind of interesting, right? Is what becomes very powerful, right? Is it's not kind of an either or per se. Like, is it humans versus the robots on the AI front? It's almost like, wow, if you take, and I know this is kind of a loaded and kind of BS concept here, but you take two artists of sort of comparable, and I know that's where it's loaded, but just humor me for a second. Two artists of kind of comparable output, comparable proficiency, right? You give one AI tools, right, and the other just has traditional, right? Anything, again, remember that concept of like the backpack, that you're going through life. And I don't know. I mean, I've started to find some of these tools myself have been incredibly helpful in my own creative process, right? And it's as simple as this, and I think both you guys would appreciate this. It is always easier to edit a document than it is to start from scratch, right? And so even if this is a zit of an idea that comes, in Eddie's parlance, boring, cliche, and I never need to hear it again kind of thing, it's still better than starting from zero, because maybe you know what not to do, right? Yeah. And so, all of this, these are powerful tools where, again, at least just being aware of the existence of some of these capabilities, is pretty powerful, right? It's almost like, back when the Beatles started using, a recording environment as almost an instrument, right? slowing down the tape, playing it backwards, right? It became a creative tool, right? And so in any event, I mean, I certainly do have, strong opinions about AI, and whether or not they will truly replace human creativity. But I think what is interesting is the evolution of these capabilities, has really skyrocketed, right? And maybe just even finish, because you mentioned a couple names that, I mean, you look back at sort of, 1.0 of generative AI companies, and this might be like, Drew Silverstein's company, Amper Live, which he sold to Shutterstock. Then you have kind of the 1.5 companies. This is like Boomi, right? Endel, maybe Mubert, sort of those. And then you've got the next group, of companies that are incredibly, that have polarizing, the Sunos of the world, right? That are, of course, under litigation right now with the rights holders. Putting all of that aside, and maybe a lot of these companies, quite honestly, including some of the big, open AIs of the world and the, Anthropics, they might not even know where they're getting the content and where they're scraping the content from, right? Yeah. And so, but you're seeing, just incredible, steps that are happening right now that, I mean, just again, I could never have imagined, right?
Yeah.
Until you hear it for yourself, and you're just kind of like, wow.
Yeah. And philosophically, they're very interesting questions that are going to be raised, because, right now with a lot of these places, you're running up against the kind of legal regime of rights holders and the data that these things are being trained on. But I think very quickly it is going to be difficult to distinguish, except in the most crudest terms, between training and learning, right? And what is it that a human being is doing when they listen to, a million songs in order to develop their songwriting capabilities, because ultimately you have to make an argument that it's not a sort of innate capability that human beings have and is just coming out after, some sort of training set on which they've been trained on, and how long does that take, and what is the actual creative activity that's happening in the, consumption, synthesis, and then production of that music. I think, the same place that a lot of people have claimed that you're not seeing you would never see the ability of AI to generate, written content at the same level that, one would expect or would hope. It is now just seemingly just a matter of time, right? I mean, I would be the first person to say, oh, it's going to happen in music faster, because music, really is just mathematics when it comes down to it, right? I mean, it's like you can map these things in terms of frequency and tempo, and it's, it's just a couple degrees of freedom within a certain kind of mathematical space.
Yeah, Western music has 12 notes.
Exactly. And so, there's combinations you can make of that, but it seems it's more easily quantifiable than someone would have thought about language. Well, it turns out that now with these, the algorithms and the sort of Bayesian probabilities that they're using to sort of interpolate, that's just a bunch of probabilities too. And it turns out that that's been teaching people a huge amount about the way that the brain itself works and makes decisions, and how cognition happens in terms of the kind of free energy problems and all these things. And so, it's literally just it seems like it's just a matter of time, right? And, people are worrying about the rights, what are you training these data sets on? But pretty soon it's like, okay, but like, the library is there, you're a human being, you go in and you read so many books, and it's like, it's like you're arguing about who has access to those types of things. Pretty soon it literally is just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Jeff, I was going to make one point. Right now, it's easier for you and for me to be editors and producers of this content because we were trained up on a different regime, right?
That
like,
you
know what it means to be an editor. The producer knows what it means to listen to a track and say, this is cliche, this is simplistic, this is what have you. I'm sort of curious, you're a father as well. Our children are going to be coming up in a different regime, right? Where, the first draft that they produce is going to get chunked out by ChatGPT, or, the first songs they produce are going to be chunked out by these generative programs. But then what is training them to be better editors or producers may be an open question.
It is, there's an ethical element, right, which is incredibly powerful, which we need to consider. But even, and I noticed this, and as a dad, having grown up, right, where you're hearing, we're going through this process looking at schools now for our kids, and one of the things that they that keeps coming up is almost this aversion. That's too strong of a word, but I'll just say it: aversion to technology, particularly aversion to these devices, right? Where they have phone hotels, they check them in, right? They'll go on these 3-day or 2-week excursions, where educational excursions where they can't be on their phone, right? And they can't do that. And there's nothing more. I mean, you guys have experienced this in me. I've had a couple meetings where, I've met with somebody and I feel like I know everything about the back of their phone, right? Because they spend all the time just like, tapping away. And it's like, dude, I'm here. Can you see me? Right. And I think, you talk about our kids, right? And just growing up, right? I mean, we didn't have this stuff, right?
Yeah.
We had to do this crazy old school thing called having a freaking conversation, right? Like, oh my God, that's crazy. Like, and I think a lot of these communication skills, right? I mean, again, remember I was talking about exercising the brain and all this, we got to exercise our communication skills, right?
Yeah,
as well.
Maybe they'll just be better at the prompts, Joey. I mean, maybe that's what you're trying to do. It's like we're still communicating like we imagine the thing's a human, but it's like the next generation of kids will be like, no, it's a machine. You don't talk to it that way.
Well, totally. And now they have these agents, which are, AI agents, which are now handling your prompt for you. Did you really mean this? Or, it's like, I remember that Seinfeld episode where, Kramer is, 1-800 movie phone or whatever, right? And, and he's like, if you would like this movie, press 4, and be like, and he's like, why don't you tell me the movie you're interested in, right? I mean, and it's funny because some of these AI, agents at some point, it's like, oh, well, I think it's this, like this jazz metal thing, and it sort of sounds like, whatever, right? And it's like, dude, why don't you just, why don't you show me what you want? Upload the song, right, or whatever, right? And it's sort of like, they're just like, come on, let's get to this, right? I don't know. Is like that a good thing? It remains to be seen. So.
We'll see.
Jeff, do you have time for our last more opinions question?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, last more opinions.
I don't know if your audience wants to hear anything more because we've blown through our. But
I mean, the good and bad news is I think Jonathan and I have just resolved ourselves to not to caring what they want.
Okay, well there you go. We just there's power in that.
Interesting. So,
that's right.
Yeah,
we'll rely on our AI overlords to care about what the audience wants at some point. Tell us what we need to change.
That's right.
Yeah. So last question is probably the most entertaining one, and that is, if you could steal any work of art or cultural artifact to have for yourself, you could never tell anybody. Maybe just your immediate family would who you're sharing a home with could know about it, but everyone else, you could never share that you'd taken this thing, whether it's a painting or a guitar by your favorite guitar player, whatever, cultural artifact or work of art that you would love to have for yourself in your home to live with.
Have you been like, are you in my computer right now seeing what I'm looking at? So well, this is very topical. So I have just recently fallen in love again with the Grateful Dead, and I don't know why it's hit me by storm, but there's this 1975 recording of the Dead at the Great American Music Hall. I think it's like November 75. They open up the show. Are you guys Grateful Dead fans or not? Not really. Kind of, sort of.
Reasonably so.
Win a trivia contest. Okay, so I promise I'm going to answer your question in the most long-winded, convoluted way possible. But the concert opens up with Help, this kind of medley. It's Help on the Way, into Slipknot, into Franklin's Tower. And actually a friend of mine just sent it to me, which started, the craziness. And he was like, isn't this thing awesome? And I was like, I've heard this, and I listened to it, and it's just an incredible recording. It's obviously live. We talk about authenticity, right? The Dead, I mean, arguably their studio stuff is not compelling compared to how they perform live. And sometimes they were train wrecks, and sometimes they were incredible, depending upon probably the degree of substances that have been consumed either at the moment or just prior to stepping on stage. But it is an incredible performance. And I started screwing around with a bunch of guitars, and Jerry Garcia had this incredible guitars. It was made by this luthier named Doug Irwin. And he had a couple of them. One was called Tiger, one was called Wolf. I think there are a couple others, but Tiger, I looked it up to just sort of see what would a guitar like this go for. The cheapest one you couldn't really, I mean, you got to go to private collectors, but one was, I think, was on reverb.com or something. I think it was on Reverb. Maybe it was somewhere else. It's going for about 35 grand for this guitar. And I was just like, God, and I sort of went down that rabbit hole of all the different luthiers. I mean, there's corners of the internet for bizarre people like me that can go deep on, what is the lineage of luthiers, from Doug Irwin, right? And then which led me to this other luthier that's in New York, in upstate New York, that was the first apprentice, for this guy. And I mean, it's just a whole crazy different world. But to answer your question, I would love to own one of these things, like a Doug Irwin custom Tiger that he made for Jerry Garcia, because the sound is just so iconic and so unique. And they kind of don't exist anymore. It's like an Honus Wagner baseball card. Like, sure, you've heard they exist, but you've never really seen one, so you don't really know if it exists, but anyway, that's my answer.
And is that what he played on this?
Yes,
this
that's what he played on.
Nice. So I guess if we're shooting for the stars here, you want to own the one that particular live performance got played on. No, I mean,
yes, I'll send you my address. You can send me.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually just been logging all the things all of our guests want to steal, and at some point I'm going to become a cat burglar and just and then start peddling this stuff to our past
There's
guests.
a cottage industry right there. I think we came up with a couple of them on the. It was a therapy for musicians who have been placed on music for cats, and and a cottage industry for items of people that your guests want to steal for their homes.
Yes, for sure. I as somebody who has created my own album in the past, I think I have to agree. Like, if I found out that the only playlist we were on Spotify was music for cats, I'm not sure how I would feel about it.
You need therapy. I've got an app for you.
I mean, I guess
there's an app for that.
Yeah, there's an app for that. Nice.
Awesome. Well, good stuff.
We will be sure to put this out just after your album comes out, so that everybody can jump straight from this episode to checking out Fuzz Collective on Color Red. But yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, November 1 is the big date, so it's both terror and exhilaration. I don't know, terror, exhilaration. Anyway,
well, we hope it goes swimmingly.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. See you next time. Jeff.